Yeah.
So whatever reservoir I had to like get my capacity to serve my clients and to adequately represent everybody, whatever reservoir I had left to kind of like recover. Um, the combination of seeing that the system can and will just kill a bunch of people, and we were fairly powerless to stop it in the immediate term. Plus the trauma of helping with the witness interviews and the organizing around Irwin and hearing from those women what was happening to them and from everybody, not just the women, but everybody, what was happening to them in that place, which was right under my nose. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'd always been so concerned about Stewart Detention Center. Um, and just feeling like this has got to be the thing that does it. You can't do non-consensual, unindicated gynecological surgeries on people and not have a dramatic at the scale that was happening and not have a dramatic shift in the entire system. And we did not have a dramatic shift in the entire system.
Welcome back, everybody. I am Jen Budd, your host of Borderland Talk, and with me today is Andrew Free, the most excellent law professor. He's a lawyer, used to be an immigrant rights attorney, immigration attorney, I guess is what you would say it. And I wanted to talk to Andrew because I had some friends ask me to do a video about why people shouldn't join ICE and you know why it is that I think you can't change systems like this from the inside, at least not in this moment that we find ourselves in. And Andrew kind of went through that as he was giving counsel and defending migrants and helping them make decisions about their immigration cases. And so I thought it would be an interesting time to bring Andrew back and maybe talk about what it is that he saw and why it is he felt that he could no longer help people within that system, and relate some of those stories to us. So if you're considering maybe you're an attorney or graduating to finally maybe pass the bar and stuff, and you might be thinking, well, I'm going to go work for ICE or I'm going to go work for migrants and try and help them and try and change the system. And we'll see what Andrew has to say about that. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm hanging in there, Jen. We're all here. We're all surviving. We have each other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we all have some degree of agency to make choices. They might not be great choices, but they're choices about how we want to be in this time. And we have capacity, whether we realize it or not, to do something. So that's what I
Mm-hmm.
hang on to. I'm really glad to be having this discussion with you, and I'm looking forward to it.
When you graduated from law school, did you were you like, oh, that's what I want to do? I want to help migrants and immigrants get their visas or get their cards and all this other stuff, get out of custody for whatever. Did you specialize specifically in certain parts of immigration or just in general?
Yeah, it's really funny. I was one of the rare birds who went to law school knowing exactly what I wanted to do when I got out, and having a really clear sense of direction and purpose when I was applying, because I was working as an immigration legal assistant, an immigration paralegal in an immigration law firm when I was applying to law school. And I'd gotten into that because I was working as a English as a second or other language teacher in Georgia, and I just was kind of stymied by the disparate outcomes that some of my students were having based on their parents' immigration status. So these were first generation students in the United States, and it really did matter whether your parents were documented or not, whether you were documented or not. And so I wanted to see about the law there. So I wrote my law school essay about how much I wanted to graduate so I could be floating in little post-its and doing immigration litigation, oddly enough. And I got the greatest internship experience I could have dreamt of for this guy, Chris Nugent, at this law firm, Holland and Knight. It's a big firm in Washington, D.C., that had a community services team. and I got to do all sorts of really cool work with high levels of responsibility that had big impacts. We helped set up kids in need of defense. We helped the LIST project to resettle Iraqi allies and preserving and expanding the special immigrant visa program. We helped prepare testimonies supporting survivors of genocide in Darfur from what is now South Sudan. Wrote some, letters for, ghost wrote advocacy letters and helped people. And it was a really wonderful experience. And then I drank the law school Kool-Aid in my second and third years and realized I was going to have to pay down all that debt. So my second year, I worked for a big law firm that litigated in San Francisco, and did a lot of defense work and convinced myself that the pro bono work I would be able to do at a big firm would justify not doing what I had gone to law school to do. And then the recession hit, and I had the unfortunate and um, really happy experience of being delayed 6 months than when I started my job for the firm in San Francisco. And my supervisor at the time for the ACLU of Tennessee said, you ought to go and work for this immigration lawyer, Elliot Osment, in Nashville. He's filing all these lawsuits for all these people, and you should go and help him if you got time. You like doing litigation, you like federal court work, immigration work. And so that's what I did. And over Labor Day weekend, I prepared a habeas case for a person who was an immigrant who was in a Tennessee jail where another immigrant that our firm was representing at the time died in custody. Um, and they wouldn't let him out. And he was on a stale ICE detainer, which only permitted 48 hours of detention post eligibility for release. And they said to me and to others, we're not letting him out. ICE can come and get him. So we filed a habeas petition, and I got to go and watch a federal judge order his release and got to see him in the courtroom in his jail outfit, and then see the transformation that happened when the Sally port opened and the door slid, the big heavy door. And
Mm.
if you have you know this experience of being part of helping a person be behind bars and then watching them walk out, it kind of spoils a law degree for anything else, you know. I mean, it kind of it made wanting to go and help rich people fight over money much less attractive to me, and took a lot of the meaning out of that. And then we responded to some ICE raids in 2010 in Nashville that were at the time some of the largest in the state, and that too helped educate me um, about where I was needed. So I went to law school to be an immigration lawyer. I got out of law school planning to be a corporate litigator and do pro bono immigration work. But once the recession hit and we got deferred for 6 months, I got a taste of what it was like to help people um,
Mhm.
in and be in direct community with them. And there was no turning back.
And you had a good taste of it too. I mean, how implement influential that must have been in that moment. I can only imagine maybe what your decision might have been had it gone the other way. And you felt like maybe
Yeah.
you had no power there or no influence in that courtroom. Did you, when you first got involved with immigration, what was your opinion of ICE agents? Because you're not dealing with what I did, Border
Yeah.
Patrol agents, right? You're typically dealing with ICE agents and ICE attorneys, right? Did you have this feeling? Because one of the hardest things I have to explain to people is they all think that the agents are honorable and this and that, and Donald Trump has just made them bad. And I'm like, oh. And so, did you meet good people within ICE and stuff that you felt were really trying to do the right thing? And so you felt, okay, I can work with these people. And
Yeah, I mean, you had to. That was part of the game is building relationships with, your local assistant field office director and the local agents to, help try and inject some humanity into it, building relationships with the trial attorneys in the courtroom who are ICE
Hmm.
employees, and many of those people who go on to be immigration judges. And part of the education that I was getting as I was doing accountability litigation against some of these ICE agents was that my view of there being just a ton of bad apples who were kind of running amok um, might not have been completely accurate. And
Mm.
it's really hard to bad apple an entire fugitive operations team. They told me in depositions, the boss of them told me they were called the Fug Ups, fugitive operations, FUGOPS.
Oh.
And they would bust into people's houses and open, kind of push their ways through doors after doing knock and talks and claim they got consent or not. They would get keys from apartment managers to enter people's apartments without consent. And there were, physical threats and violence and a lot of verbal abuse and a lot of Fourth Amendment violations. And, you know, um, it's hard when you look at it um, in retrospect, knowing now what I know
Hmm.
from all this, to say anything other than, oh yeah, this is an institution, this is a system that is set up to operate outside the Constitution and operate with impunity. But at the time, it did feel like there were a lot of good people trying to do the right thing, and particularly the trial attorneys, when we could explain to them and show them, we won a case to suppress evidence in immigration court at the Board of Immigration Appeals because the guys that ICE had arrested had been arrested unlawfully. They'd been racially profiled. And we were able to demonstrate in this very rare and meaningful decision that that was not a way that ICE was going to be able to prosecute somebody. And so the trial attorney, who was a good guy, for all I
Hmm.
knew. He was the lead guy at the time, and he said, "Well, what do you want to do? You want to do deferred action? You want to do closure?" And there were negotiations. Similarly, if you could put together a compelling immigration removal defense case or a compelling case that a person shouldn't be deported because they had an avenue for relief, um, a lot of times, even in detained work in Louisiana, which is where people in Tennessee who got arrested would be taken, both the trial attorneys and the judges would basically look at it, apply reason, apply the law, and cut people loose or show show mercy. Um, I can remember the moment that I realized that that was changing very distinctly.
That was going to be
And
my next question.
yeah, I can and I think it was a it was part of um a a pattern of trauma that would eventually just engulf me and lead me to
Mm.
the suicidal ideation and just not being able to function in the system because of all the triggers and all that. But before that, I just remember an immigration judge who had come from the immigrants' rights bar,
Mm.
who had been not a prosecutor, and who had made some very good and sound decisions and who wanted to protect the law, even if it meant granting relief. I remember that judge being saddled with so much work around the child docket in 2014, 2015, when all they were doing was, it felt like all they were doing was prosecuting and ordering deported unaccompanied children or unaccompanied children and their parents. All these were choices, by the
Hmm.
Obama administration at the time.
Yeah.
To stop staunch the flow of people coming, but they used this deterrence methodology, and it took this person who had been eminently uh, uh, professional and temperate in the courtroom, and who had been kind when they came on the bench, and who had spent a life, um, maybe not their whole life, but enough of their life to know immigration law well,
Hmm.
basically defending folks. It took that person from there I'll just never forget it, just snapping at a 3-year-old in the courtroom. who was making
Wow.
too much noise and threatening. This is when they started moving bailiffs into the immigration courtrooms. There was a time when you didn't have guards, like private security dudes and women just walking through your courtroom in the non-detained setting, but they added that. And it was very triggering for me to see an adult yelling at a child and their parent to be quiet. That child didn't have any idea what they were doing there,
Right.
and their parent had even less of an idea, I think.
Hmm.
Like, why is this happening? What is going on here? Um, and talking to many of those people and trying to do our little part, whatever the government believed about their claims under the law, they had valid legal claims, you know.
Right.
And so to come into a courtroom and get yelled at because a kid's being a kid, and then to see this transformation of this person into, that it was just like, oh man, this is really, really changed. But maybe it hadn't. Maybe I just started seeing what it was like, and the conditions made it more apparent. Because I think that may have been around the time or on the heels of family detention. Um, and building a camp in Texas near the man camps of the oil fields and putting kids and their parents there in order to try and get them to give up their claims. Um, Even working inside that place and eventually getting banned from it for life. Um, it's really strains your it strained my belief in like the fact that these are just good people doing a job, wanting to engage in public service, and just maybe a little bit misguided, you know.
Hmm.
Because if a judge is ordering you released and then an ICE agent is saying, well, no, you're going to wear this ankle monitor. And then you as the lawyer is saying, I'm going to go along with what the ICE agent said because they're the
Hmm.
ICE agent and I work for ICE too. And you're not getting out unless you agree to put this ankle monitor on. We'll appeal your bond. I mean, you know, what is the point of all this? What are we doing here, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so those were the beginning of some of the contradictions. I would say that was about 3 or 4 years in. Um, but yeah, for most of the time, I was generally um, hopeful and willing to work with law enforcement.
Yeah.
We helped indict and convict a police officer who was demanding money and sexual favors from immigrants who he was pulling over. God
Hmm.
knows how many people he did it to, but I happen to know, a former FBI agent who brought this guy into the FBI, and I felt like there had to be places where you could go when even the accused or the condemned were being subjected to illegal harm. And so I wanted
Hmm.
to maintain those relationships and um, thought it was useful for my clients.
How long did you do this for?
12 years, I would say,
12
before
years.
yeah.
So around year 4 or 5, you start to realize that this is more systemic and obviously, and looking at the time frame too, you think about during it was George W. Bush after 9/11, who then criminalized the 1325. And when I saw them do that, I went, oh, that's really bad. That's down the road. They're looking down the road.
Yeah.
Um, and then did you just end up slowly getting to the point where you end up not being able to help cases? You're losing more cases, even though the evidence is mounted up and stuff like that, or you're like your choices when you're talking to your client, like you could take this shitty option or this really shitty option. Which one, kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of the above. I always thought what my mentors taught me, which was, if it's unjust, then there has to be a way in the law to deal with it. That's what we're here
Mm-hmm.
for, is to try and deal with justice. And if you haven't found that way yet, you keep trying to find it because that's what our legal system is for. And
Mm-hmm.
without
Mm-hmm.
it, I believed at the time, then we're just kind of lost. We have to inject even where the system is resistant to it. We have to inject some measure of justice. I would say the more primary and secondary trauma that I was picking up. I mean, I picked up a lot at Dilley, just secondary trauma, just parents with very sick children who were begging to get out. I worked with the survivor of rape and sexual assault by a guard. I worked with a whistleblower who was documenting the fact that small children were losing weight, which is a thing small children aren't supposed to do, and then having the
Mm,
company that she worked for telling her to not document that. Don't put those kids' weight on the chart, like so. There's a lot of that, and then the more
mm,
asylum work I did, the more I'm hearing about child abuse and other forms of, familiar interfamily violence and other, forms. At the same time, um, my hopeful side is doing cases under the Freedom of Information Act to get information about the system.
mhm,
I'm representing deported U.S. citizens,
mm,
people who had been through a removal proceeding and tried. Andres Robles was one of them. We sued the U.S. and settled for at the time what was the highest settlement that was publicly available, or this it equaled the highest settlement publicly available. And that guy was trying to say during his hearing that he was a citizen, and he tried to tell his lawyer, and his lawyer ignored him. So you get compassion fatigue,
mhm.
and you get burnout. And then if you were like me and you didn't have a good, solid self-care routine and you didn't understand fully PTSD and what primary and secondary stress, traumatic stress looks like. And most importantly, I would say for me personally, it was a thing that I see a lot of in lawyers and other helping professions. People who I would, just like professional fuck givers, excuse my language. And I hope this doesn't get us taken down, but
It's fine.
people who show up, um, I think a lot of times those people are trying to fill a need. I know I was.
Mhm.
And for me, it was less about and that's like a bottomless empty pit, if the need is bad enough, if the sort of
Yeah.
conceptualization of self or your identity is so wrapped up in your professional life, and what you're able to do for other people as opposed to just being okay, and not being self-aware about that. It meant that like even impossible cases that I would win, um, cases that in front of judges that don't grant relief, cases for which there's not a precedent, I would not feel good after winning those cases, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like I just made the system seem fairer than it is.
Mm.
And by showing that somebody can, in theory, put together a case and prevail. Not only that, but I was just terrible at saying no. If there was a need, I was trying to show up, regardless of
Right.
capacity, financial, emotional, logistical. And the game starting in the first Trump administration was to deluge us with paper and to deluge us um, with new practice demands that fundamentally reset what we could do, how many cases we could take, how many hearings we could do, because now we're going to add burdens to you to do things.
Mhm.
Um, and, I just did not get ahead of that. And, it's a lawyer's responsibility to supervise his staff too. And
Mhm.
everybody who's been in business or practice understands that, like, that's a tough job. That's a tough job. So it was a combination of things that led up to in 2018 when I volunteered in Tijuana. Um, I think that was the first like moment where it's just like, oh, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to do continuing to do of this. And there we were accompanying some asylum seekers who were unaccompanied children and staying in a shelter. And our big idea was to present them to the Border Patrol or to CBP at the US Mexico border and accompany them
Right.
there and show them, this works. There was no legal reason why they should have been, turned back. And they were people who shouldn't have been put on the metering list, which is the kind of like get in line to claim asylum, which was declared illegal later on. Um, And we got into so this is the Otay Mesa port of entry on the Mexico side. And, a group of us, group of kids, and we get surrounded by BORTAC and a special operations team on the US side of the concrete. And we get surrounded on the Mexican side of concrete by the Mexican military and the Mexican police. And then Grupos Beta shows up and they literally are pulling this kid. Grupos Beta is pulling him on one side, the Mexican Navy is pulling him on another. This is in the context of like 14,000 Hondurans who are fleeing JOH's regime showing up in Tijuana and kind of camping out, you know, along with people from other
Hmm.
countries. And so,
Hmm.
and this is also in the context of like people being disappeared from those mass shelters and murdered by the cartels, people being put into sex work. You're starting to see, you
Ransom.
know, all of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so doing like protection of some of those higher value media people and, trying to get them safety and shelter and legal capacity. Um, so we show up and long story short, we're turned back. I'm expelled from Mexico with some other
Wow.
legal workers and a reporter. Uh, to which I said, okay, fine, I'll be expelled from Mexico. Um, I go to the bathroom at the US side, buy some water, turn around, walk back. And then the folks that I was with are then followed and spat at by the Mexican cop um, on the Otay side because we got to get our car. And then on the way back to Tijuana, where the office was, we're jacked up by some other Mexican cops and threatened with kidnapping.
Oh, lovely.
Um, and we had enough money on us to convince them that that would be annoying for them.
Hmm.
So
Be
uh,
bad for them
a
in
few
the
days
long run.
later, Jalisco New Generation Cartel lured three of those kids out of that shelter where all those kids were staying, tortured them and murdered two of them, put their bodies back in front of the shelter, and told the surviving one, don't listen to the lawyers because we were taking money out of their pockets. They wanted those kids to go be mules in between ports of entry.
Yeah.
CBP was saying, come to the port of entry, supposedly. Kirsten Nielsen, come to the port of entry. So we did, and we got turned back. And, and those kids died. And so that was like blaming myself for that, for the tactical decisions that night. And, convincing myself that had we done something more, like in my mind, to the context here is you remember the images of pepper of gas, tear gas and stuff when people supposedly rushed the border Thanksgiving of 2018.
Yes, that the current commissioner CBP threw at them. Yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. There was also a person who was shot with a tear gas cannon, sorry, a rubber bullet from a helicopter.
Oh,
Nobody
wow.
ever reported on that.
Hmm.
Um, but my fear that night, and I talked to this dude, one of the short kings from BORTAC, Sean from New Orleans. And I just tried to establish a rapport with him. And I was like, under no circumstances are you going to be shooting at these kids tonight. It's just like,
Hmm.
it's like, no, no, we're not. It's like, he was like, but you guys can't come. You guys get, and um, so yeah, the regret that comes from that, was a product of, kind of like centering yourself as the savior. It's like white savior complex,
Yeah.
I didn't kill those
Yeah.
children. I'm not, you know, but had we succeeded, those kids would not have died. So,
Right.
uh, and because I'm not a monster, that stuff bothers me. It's, like I don't know how these folks are fishing people out of the river all the time, where they just turn them back from the port of entry and it doesn't bother them, you know? Um, so we spoke to OIG about it. Went and talked to the Inspector General for DHS and gave them
Hmm.
names and badge numbers, and because it's a international human rights violation, it's a crime under US law, and
The
you
children
know.
died, they were murdered. Yeah.
Well, no, the turnback. That was what we
Oh,
were
the
talking
turnback.
about. And then it was because of the turnback that happened, maybe, but and they were sympathetic, but they couldn't even get into Mexico with the authorization of the US government because it was too dangerous and they weren't allowed to go. I think they might have gone anyway. I don't know, just on their personal
Mm-hmm.
time to see what was going on. But so that had two major effects. First, like if the people who are at the top want to ignore the rule of law and want to ignore things, then it's very difficult for people from below to resist that in any meaningful way. Aside from like little episodic battles, like you're not just going to reverse it, and if
Mm-hmm.
you decide to illegally shut down the border, or close the port of entry, or turn over the entry of asylum seekers to Grupos Beta, or somebody who's charging sexual favors for access to the port of entry, it's very difficult for people doing the right thing to just wave the law in front of them and say you can't do
Mm-hmm.
this because they have guns. I
Yeah.
don't, you know. Uh, a lot of good things came out of that, you know. I don't know if they make up for all the people who were, it's not just those people. There are a lot of people were harmed as a
Yeah.
result and are still being harmed. It set the tone for what Biden did, shutting down the
Mm-hmm.
border, and it set the tone for the mass repression and surveillance of legal workers who were working in Mexico and organized, who were working with quote unquote caravans in Mexico. People ended up on lists, which are now apparently being revived. That happened. Family separation happened, you know.
Yeah.
Responding to the need, like the human need of having and at the time my son was like 3, 4, now he was 5, maybe 6. I just remember he was young enough that he seemed like those kids, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think I became way too associated with my clients to maintain the sort of professional distance that a lot of people have towards their clients. And the
Yeah.
same was true of my work with people in detention through the forced labor cases and the wrongful death cases. I just way too identified and became a fight
Yeah.
that, and a lot of lawyers don't have that. They're not there, and that's okay. That
Mm-hmm.
makes them effective. And I became way too disassociated with the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was part one, and then part two of the like trauma and I mean, COVID obviously hit, and I found out that federal judges and DOJ attorneys and lots of people who are lawyers who are in this self-policing profession of ours were perfectly willing to kill people, like to let people die of completely preventable deaths of COVID because of their version of whatever law is, you know. Um, that was pretty gross. That was pretty
I think
gross.
my wife mentions COVID a lot just for her. She has nothing to do with immigration in her professional capacity, but um just she always says that COVID really made her realize how many Americans just lack empathy or sympathy at all. And it just, I think it really, that was a big sign of where we were headed when people, in Chicago now and places and seeing the ICE raids. Now we're building bigger concentration camps. I don't want to say now we're building concentration camps because they've been here for a while. But, and people will say to me, how did we get here? And I'm like, oh man, you just, it's been going on for forever. And I mean, I would like to put it back on Bill Clinton in the 90s with deterrence policy. That's maybe the most modern, or the you could even take it back to Reagan and the deal between, okay, we're going to do some amnesty, but now we're going to create this giant system, which has been going on since then. But I mean, really, our immigration laws, and then just in my studies with reading John Washington's work and stuff like that, it's like we've always been like this. But I would think like the system that we have now today, I would date back to like really having its birth, at least, with Reagan and Clinton. And now we're to the point where even if you win a case in court, and even if the judge says, okay, you're going to get asylum, because I know an immigration attorney over in Tucson, he won his case, very happy. The lady had just mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence. Cartel was after her and all this other stuff, and her kids, because she had been the boyfriend of a cartel member at one point, or girlfriend. And then I still demands that she come in and do check-ins. And it's like, what did that happen? Was that starting to go on while you were still practicing, or is that more like 2.0, Trump 2.0?
The difference was whether a person was detained when they won, I think. I did win cases where like against a judge who had a 0% grand rate, and I was able to get her
Mm,
reversed. And, it was reversed on one very specific thing that seemed like it was going to be the ground for relief had it gone the right way. And that judge took it on upon herself to cross-examine this guy's mother and call her a liar and accuse her of all this kind of stuff. And he basically saw a situation where his mother is maybe getting in trouble or he's getting deported, and he chose to get deported.
yeah.
He was falsely, and he was criminalized. He was falsely accused in the Arkansas criminal system, and so there's always been this situation where folk
Sorry.
have paid the price for winning. But if you were out of custody, that was less often, I would say. The idea that no matter, heads I win, tails you lose, which is the current system, of like if you get protection from one country, we'll just send you to another. And you get no, according to the Supreme Court, you get no process in that decision. That's what's killing a lot of people, I would say. You know, COVID, you said something about COVID. I think um, the other thing that happened with COVID was there was this mass movement of people during the summer. And there
Mm-hmm.
was this moment when it felt like people were kind of like coming around,
Mm-hmm.
and people were, me including, like I have not always understood what I understand about the system. I've had to be educated by very patient people who I probably annoyed the hell out of. And for
Me
that, I
too.
am sorry.
Yeah.
And I still don't know it all. So, but I felt like COVID was a moment where we really could have connected the struggles of people inside with the struggles of people outside, because everybody's kind of feeling like they're locked in with
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
government, and that is something that the right did really, really well, was take that feeling of being oppressed by a government system that wouldn't tell you or give you like all the answers from their perspective and really capitalize on it. Because there's this entitlement, that people feel, to be able to be in control of their own lives. And I felt like that was an opportunity when we really could have like connected those two
Mm-hmm.
things. Like people inside are in the same situation as people outside. Um, but then the other thing that happened during 2020 was the Irwin County Detention Center whistleblower from Project
Mm-hmm.
South, Dawn
Yep.
Wooten, and the stories that ran around that, and then my involvement in that, for which I ended up being deposed and asked under oath if I knew Alyssa Milano. So, um, that was all, that was it, I think, for me in terms of burnout and trauma.
Yeah.
So whatever reservoir I had to like get my capacity to serve my clients and to adequately represent everybody, whatever reservoir I had left to kind of like recover, um, the combination of seeing that the system can and will just kill a bunch of people, and we were fairly powerless to stop it in the immediate term, plus the trauma of helping with the witness interviews and the organizing around Irwin and hearing from those women what was happening to them, and from everybody, not just the women, but everybody, what was happening to them in that place, which was right under my nose. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'd always been so concerned about Stewart Detention Center. Um, and just feeling like this has got to be the thing that does it. You can't do non-consensual, unindicated gynecological surgeries on people and not have a dramatic, at the scale that was happening, and not have a dramatic shift in the entire system. And we did not have a dramatic shift in the entire system because a lot of reasons that I won't necessarily expound upon right now. But um, just the ice cream scoop out of your soul that takes of
Do
living
you
with all
feel
that
that
pain.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just all that pain that people, and but all the resilience too that they, and solidarity that they held for each other to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing how inadequate law was to to protect them, and how much other means of protection or harm reduction or systemic justice work were more effective. You know, the my friend and collaborator John Hanson at Harvard Law School has written an article with Jacob Lipton about the Occupy injustice. It's like the injustice framework. And one of the things he always says is, students go to law school for justice. We have it written
Mm-hmm.
on our buildings. We have it written above our courtrooms. We go to court for justice. We go to lawyers to get justice.
Mm-hmm. And
And what law school and courtrooms and lawyers give people is law. And they're not the same
mm.
thing.
Yeah.
And they are just not the same thing. And um and it became so acute when you have such a clear record for protecting people and holding people accountable that then becomes muddled and I would say complicated by mendacious lawyers, and by law, right?
Mm-hmm.
So uh in addition to all of the burnout and being like functionally incapacitated by suicidal ideation and feelings of like, a lot of this is my fault for not being better at my job,
Right.
and feelings like all I can do is harm, you know, and then knowing people who had lost the advocacy attempts or whatever, and it cost them their lives, you know,
Yeah.
like it was too much. It was more than I had the capacity to deal with.
So would you say to young prospective uh law school graduates who think, I think I can get in there and do good, and maybe they come from an immigrant background, a family, or it's just their passion, like with you, what do you tell them about now? I mean, it's got to be like this last year of Trump 2.0, especially in immigration, in all aspects, but because we focus on immigration, but as well as specifically immigration, has just been mind-boggling, just so fast, and so the changes. But at the same time, it's like, well, yeah, this was where they were always going. Are you surprised at how fast they've been able to um I'm not really surprised. I'm kind of almost kind of glad that they're showing who they really are. But what do you tell young attorneys who maybe are thinking about wanting to do this kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, as I like have gotten space from it, as I've done a lot of my sort of like while on disability, doing a lot of therapy and trauma healing and all the things you have to do to put yourself together again when you're broken. Um, like, and part of that was trying to share the useful information that I have with students and with people that I mentor who might want to go and do this, so that they are not in a situation years later where they're, having like, I had a lot of I did the math, and like three or four of my mentors ended their own lives, you know,
Oh,
uh, or some
wow.
some are permanently disabled, Some of the
Yeah.
closest people to me died early deaths doing this work. It's not easy
Yeah.
work. And I think honestly, the students who are doing stuff now are at such a better place than I was, regardless of how much worse the situation is materially, because they've got like an analysis that I did not have that provides strength and that provides like the appropriate relationship to the system, or can provide. I'm not saying it does for everybody, but it can afford you, if you understand what we're actually dealing with, an appropriate relationship to what your job is if you're going to go and be doing direct representation or trying to make an impact in the system. And so where I started was not with Clinton or Reagan, which is an appropriate place to start in many ways, but where I started was with the Supreme Court case that effectively seized all of the indigenous owned land in the United States.
Mm.
A case in which the Supreme Court justice had an interest. John
Yeah.
Marshall, his family owned part of that land. He never disclosed it. It was a case that was like cooked up to go into the Supreme Court because you had to explain and establish the power to exclude people from the United States if you're going to teach immigration law. Where's the power to exclude comes from? Well, it comes from some pretty specious arguments. And if you go back further than that, you're going back to like the Requerimiento and, kind of Spanish conquistadors and the papal bulls. And, you know, um, this is all stuff that you can read about when you're not on deadline all the time and when you're not
Yeah.
going in and out of detention centers or taking depositions or talking to families. And so just understanding like the root of immigration law is plenary power. Plenary power is the power of the king. It's an empire doctrine. The other places it works are in Indian law, in less so, thankfully, but and in the law like of basically like what this country does everywhere else. And its plenary power has no actual textual basis in the Constitution. It's just assumed and asserted by white supremacists throughout history, whether it's history in the legislature or the judiciary. And it is effectively the law that we see on the streets in the hands of, you name it, some kitted out, steroided law enforcement officer that you can basically do anything, um, that you know, nobody but the white man has any laws that you're bound to respect. And it's racialized, it's paternalized, it's ableist, it's all these things, but mostly it's about like if you steal somebody's land, you better be able to kill them if they try and get it back. And that's it. If you have no legal
Is
basis.
plenary power, is that similar to, how is that in relation to what we hear? I remember Stephen Miller accidentally said that on CNN and then acted like his mic cut out because if
Yeah,
you
because he,
understand law, that's like you said, it's the king's law. Whatever he says is what is law, and he can
Mhm.
change his mind at any point. So, but my question is the modern day version of that, the what do they call that, the unitary executive power?
Yeah, I mean
Is that
that's
what they
the
call it?
it's the business end of the plenary power doctrine, but plenary power is rooted in this idea that without any constitutional text, in order to defend this thing we call the United States, which is based on this document we call the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
from people outside or to defend its borders. None of the Bill of Rights, none of the constitutional amendments, none of the limitations that you would normally have vis-a-vis a U.S. citizen really applies. And it's why Congress or the president can enact racially discriminatory policing practices. It's why we have the constitution-free zone of two-thirds of the American population around the U.S.-Mexico border and on the coasts and on the northern border.
Mm-hmm.
All of that roots back to the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Supreme Court's importation of plenary power into U.S. immigration law, which was itself the Chinese Exclusion Act was, I'm getting really wonky here, but this is, when I talk to students about this, what I try and explain to them is you are dealing with the law of the king. You are dealing with
Yeah.
the law of the regime. And so you can push it so far. You can avail yourselves of certain forms of protection. You can use certain methodologies to do harm reduction, but the king's law will never overthrow the king. I mean, like never. And so there's not a way if we win somehow, which we have over and over again in the forced labor cases and the minimum wage cases.
Hmm.
If we win somehow, there's always a reason why the interests of the king or the interest of the empire in this case, because it's not hereditary, like why those outweigh the actual law that Congress and the states passed, or that, like if the state of California wants to ban immigration detention centers, or if the state of Illinois wants to make you take your masks off and walk the streets as an officer of the law, you know,
Hmm.
not like some, you know, the first time I ever saw cops with masks on with machine guns was in Tijuana.
Hmm. Yeah.
They were riding around on the backs of trucks with machine guns and with masks on because they were fighting
Yeah.
cartels,
Yeah.
and we're going into daycare centers and courtrooms. So, but like, so I think that there is a place for harm reduction. I think that I still think that getting people their freedom is one of the highest uses of your law degree, whether it's immediate, helping the person walk a person out of jail, or whether it's long term, helping, make it so there's not a jail to walk them out of, or so that there can't be jails to walk it out of, or like, so there can't be laws that criminalize and put people into jails. I think that that's like one of the best ways to do it, or protect people in other ways who are having other freedoms, kind of systematically deleted in our
Yeah.
rights doge. But I feel like our rights got doged. But it's not like a thing. I know very few people who are able to do this long term
Yeah.
and with any degree of humanity, which is what's required to
Hmm.
do it effectively, and not have a big part of themselves kind of taken, you know, um,
Yeah.
or to give. You might not be taken, but you might willingly just decide, yeah, I'm gonna witness and bear this violence with you. I'm choosing to step into this with you because it exists, and I'm gonna basically take off the mask and see, oh yeah, there's all these border patrol deaths, and they're calling them wall falls, and we have no idea how the person died, or oh yeah, there's all these people getting tortured in prison and getting murdered or overdosing or beaten in prison, or there's all these people in ICE detention dying. Like that exists regardless of whether people are choosing to work around it or work in it.
Hmm.
And so I have encouraged people, to find your people,
Yeah.
find your little group of folks that you can trust. Be open to spreading that group, and friendship is a resource, and all of that. And I've also encouraged people to like take care of yourself, because when there's no oxygen mask on the parent, the child suffocates. I struggle
Yeah.
so much. The immigration bar, watched the basis of like justice and fairness and the protections that people fought really hard in the 60s, 70s, 80s to insert into the deportation regime, which is called removal, which is the same thing we called removing indigenous people from their land in the 1830s, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's a weird, weird historical echo. But I watched people basically normalize it, you know? It's like, oh, well, this
Yeah.
is what you require now. And it's just like,
Yeah.
and that's when I think what you can probably relate to, maybe some of your audience can relate to, I know I can, is you become a violence worker, whether you
Hmm.
recognize it or not. You are helping facilitate in the name, whether you're an immigration lawyer, humanitarian worker, you are helping at some level facilitate in the name of law or justice or order or whatever it is, a lot of violence, a lot of harm, you know? And so, know that you're going in and you will be a violence worker. One of my clerks taught me, he worked for someone else, and I didn't agree with it at the time, but that person was right. She was like, in immigration law, in order to tell a client yes, or to get a client a yes, you have to say a lot of no's. You have to tell a lot of people you're screwed, because the law screws over a lot of people. And my attitude always about it is, well, let's find a different way, let's figure out where the
Hmm.
justice lies and try and, but I think, in saying no to all those people, you're basically saying, like, we have nothing here for you. We will not protect you. Your life is not important to us. You have no rights we are bound to protect. regardless of all of our obligations. And be clear about that. As long as you're clear about it, then you can deal with it. But if you take on the mantle, like I did, of someone who's like fighting for justice, and then you're
Yeah.
going and, explaining to some segment of people, nothing we can do for you. Sorry,
Yeah.
I think so. I think people are much better situated today who are going into this work with a historical grounding, like they have some idea that like this is like the law of empire and immigration law in particular. It's why you can go
Hmm.
and train police in the Philippines who then use the same tactics in LA, like
Right.
it's because they're using the same sort of like theory of the population and counterinsurgency. I think students know that. Many of them do more than when I was going to school, at least, certainly more than me. Um, I think we can also see very clearly some of the wool has been pulled off about like who does this benefit? You know, like
Yeah.
truly, who is this benefiting? Or is the economy that much better? Or jobs that, I mean, in Georgia, where I live, we lost jobs last year.
Yeah.
Like Coca-Cola laid off 75 workers, like in the marketing department. I was, there's like people lost jobs. So who's benefiting here? The people benefit, but who? I think people are much clearer about that. And I think the linkages to chattel slavery are also much clearer than they were before George Floyd and before the movement that built up through George Floyd. I mean, you can definitely see and say without being ridiculed that men whipping Haitian migrants on horseback has a historical. I know they didn't whip them, and I know there was not whips and all this other stuff, but you know what I'm saying. Look at that picture. You're riding down black people in a river.
Yeah.
So
And the truth of that was too that I have witnessed agents use those reins specifically for that purpose. And I have cases of agents using that to whip migrants with. And they always say, well, it's self-defense. And I just used, but they keep those reins long on purpose so that they can do that. And just the fact that they denied it, and part of me feels like maybe it is beneficial, I think, for young attorneys, especially if you want to go into immigration and whatever side to go and actually see that and try and get judgments for your clients and see how ridiculous it is now, and they just um, don't believe, well, flat out, like you said, tell the clients you're a liar, your witnesses are liars, I don't care, blah blah blah, and that it really isn't much of a court of justice at all. Hasn't been for a long time, but certainly isn't right now. um,
yeah, you
I don't
can't
want to.
change the rules in the middle of the game like they have. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you won that? Well, sorry, that claim is not there anymore. You don't get to win on that. And
Hmm.
not be subject. I mean, there's really, the law is essentially on the basis of plenary power that this is within the discretion of the executive or the legislative branch, and the judge and the courts can't really do a lot about it. So, you know, that's that's harmful. You're going to see a lot of harm.
Yeah.
People still need to do it. I mean, people are getting out
Hmm.
of jail on habeas petitions because lawyers are going in and helping them file habeas petitions. And the difference between the lawyers that are going to get like a fulfilling, satisfying experience out of that, and those are going to burn out and become, whatever they're going to become, or you're trying to build something that people without lawyers can use, you know.
Right.
There's two other parts of this, I realized and recognized when I started getting retaliated against that there's nobody to go to.
Yeah.
The quote unquote good ones are both outnumbered, disempowered, and not willing to put their career on the line to not even interrupt the bad ones. Finding a
Yeah.
quote unquote good one who's going to sacrifice everything in their life to take on someone more powerful within the government than them, that's really hard.
I've
you know,
had to learn that lesson myself.
I think you know that lesson.
I know that lesson pretty well. Yeah.
So that made it pretty difficult. And then, because I worked so much when I was working, I did a lot of things. There's a lot of cases that, result in decisions, and a lot of, in addition to all the bad of like becoming disabled and not being able to follow through on, people whose cases I cared about, there's also the like, there is positive like precedent and outcome and movement. And so, yeah, that the first one was not realizing there's not really a person I can turn to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
when the person comes to me and says this wrong thing has happened, and the moment I realized that was, this guy was shot by an ICE agent in Nashville during an arrest, or an attempted arrest, an attempted seizure,
Mm-hmm.
and they went on a manhunt that I was pretty convinced, given the guys who were involved, was going to result in some deadly force.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to see that happen. And I'm ashamed to say I was afraid of the wrong people getting shot. That's what I was afraid of. I was afraid of them like going into a trailer park and kicking in doors and shooting a person who looked like that person. I really should,
Right.
it's like the internal criminalization in my own head that I did through years of the law. But through cooperating with the FBI to help his family locate him and help him surrender,
Mm-hmm.
in an effort to prevent further violence and bloodshed, I found myself in the parking lot of a hospital in Nashville, being the person who met him as he was walking up,
Mm-hmm.
all kind of like, I know that we're surrounded by cops, and he meets me, and we're walking into the emergency room, and he drops the bullet into my hand. And I was just like, wow, this guy, he fished the bullet out of his body. And it came, this
Dang.
guy's gun. I know this guy. I've worked for years with this guy.
Yeah.
Uh, and that guy was not charged with assault on a federal officer. In fact, that guy walked out of the hospital after surgery
Wow.
because the trajectory of the bullets and the trajectory of where it went into his body
Uh-huh.
was completely inconsistent with the story about why they pulled the trigger. You can't be in fear for your life, like you're going to get run over by a car, such that you're shooting the guy if you're shooting multiple shots through his driver's side door. He can't run you over when you're not in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I asked the feds, are you guys going to prosecute him?
Yeah.
Not the guy, but the shooters.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
they made a statement that justifying the use of force.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, so they can do this.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah. And that's what the rest of the country is finding out right now
yeah.
like the woman shot in Chicago. They're like, oh man, she's got a great case. And I'm like, no.
Nope. uh,
Nope.
so that was one where I was just like, okay. And then I think just you know, the disappointment of having seen movement deliver uh, the previous incumbents in the White House and in Congress, not just the presidency, but the Georgia Senate seats, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then them pretending like they didn't know us, or they didn't make any promises, or like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was as naive as I felt like I was at the time. I just had a different vision of what was possible. And that was very,
Did you happen to see this morning that Democrat out of New Mexico has come out with a new immigration system plan?
no,
Um,
I'm interested. What is,
Andrea Flores is
okay.
posting about it on her Substack and recommending she supports this new plan, and she's a subscriber to my
Hmm.
my Substack, and I'm a subscriber to hers, and I respect her a great deal. She was Biden's advisor in the beginning when he had
Hmm.
made a lot of promises,
Yep.
and then she became disillusioned, obviously, and resigned. But I know she's a real big powerhouse and so forth. And I kind of, the plan is kind of very vague and stuff. But what upsets me the most about it, and I had commented on it, is there's no accountability. There's nothing in there that talks about accountability. And then at the same time, it says, we need to make sure we have real security on our border and give money to make sure ICE and CBP have enough money. And I'm just like, come on, how much money do these people need? It's ridiculous. And then the suggestion, too, that we need to return to, is it TPS? Temporary protective status and DACA and programs like that. And I'm like, first of all, they've pretty much decimated TPS. They're going to go after DACA. And these are incomplete programs that leave people vulnerable. And I don't know a ton about ICE programs and things like that. I'm on the other side, I'm on the Border Patrol side. But it just depresses me after everything that they have seen with her knowledge and her experience and I just do not, they just keep coming back with, we need a secure border, we need to make sure we spend money on these people that ICE and CBP have, and that includes Border Patrol, have everything, all the resources that they need. And I'm like, are you not watching what's going on the television right now? Have you not seen what is going on? And especially on the border. I mean, Border Patrol is not even on the border down here on the southern border. It's all militarized now. It's like a no man's zone out there. And they're just going to hide all the deaths. They're just going to let them cross and die out there. And for me, I don't know where you are, but I just can't support, I cannot support anybody who's like, let's work within this system and bring back TSP and DACA, and we'll keep going with what we're going with. And it's just like, did we not just learn that lesson through the Biden administration?
Yeah, I mean that's why it's helpful to have like a historical and material analysis of who the system serves and why these things exist and why it is that certain people have freedom of movement in the world
Yeah.
based on capital or race or other things, and why certain people don't. Um, and why every time we make proposals like this that build on the exact same faulty frames, we dig ourselves deeper into the holes of the mistakes of the past. It's like
Uh-huh.
when you're in a hole, stop digging. And I know for a fact that a lot of those folks, many of whom I am friends with, you know,
Yeah.
um, people who worked really hard and, as frustrated as I got and as I think obnoxious is the right word for how I express that frustration. I can
Mm-hmm.
own that. I don't think it makes me wrong, but I think it makes me unconvincing. You know, it's hard to be convincing when you're arguing that the basis of a system needs rethinking.
Yeah.
And it's like, um, he, without we have such a short, we have like this collective amnesia about how things happen. We have such a short memory collectively
Mm-hmm.
about how and why we got where we are.
Yeah.
And in the absence of that, these folks that I'm friends with, they're convinced that the reason Biden lost is because he gave a little bit of ground and did parole. They're convinced.
Oh
You
my
can't convince
God.
them otherwise. They have data to prove it, you know? And it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the facts on the ground. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a political argument that can't be won, or it can only be lost because you're arguing about something in the past. You can't go back and re-win the election. So the only
I
way,
think it's also too, though, that people are ignoring. They do not want to admit that these agencies, specifically ICBP and Border Patrol, of the federal law enforcement agencies, have worked to create the conditions that we saw during the Biden administration on purpose. Every Border Patrol CBP agent knows if you close the legal avenues, they're just going to cross illegally. And they kept arguing for that because they wanted it to look like an invasion. That's part of the plan that they did. Um, you could go back to the Obama years right before Trump came in, some of the lowest crossing rates ever illegally. And Trump came in and just kind of ginned it up so that they could have more people crossing. And they just don't want to admit, like, they just, it's the same say, like when Biden got in there and they're like, well, all these honorable Border Patrol agents. And I'm just like, I have cover up teams. You guys, you just will not go there. You will not admit that they just helped overthrow our democracy. And that's what they're still doing. That's what they're still doing. And they're in our cities. And when it comes down to voting time, I have no doubt that they're going to be going through those lines of people standing there waiting to vote, going, you don't look like a citizen. You don't look like a citizen. And they'll take you away like they're doing right now for 3 to 4 hours. And oh, by the time that they release you, oh, the voting booths are closed. Sorry. And they just don't want to admit that. It's like, to sit there and say that the agents themselves are so corrupt and that they're buying into this whole thing. I can sit there and understand you thinking that maybe a lot of agents are naive about this, especially if they're young to the agency. But the system of what they're doing, bringing the military in to do immigration policing, which is a civilian form of policing. And it's just astonishing that people just will not admit that the immigration system situation has been politicized to the point, which has always been politicized, but politicized to the point of where they're going to be arresting, and they already have, but they're going to continue and get even worse, arresting American citizens and putting them in these places. And they just, I, I guess they're just going to have to wait until they themselves get arrested before they finally believe what's coming. But I cannot look at these politicians who sit there and go, well, we need to get back to this and this and this. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's a collective abdication of whatever responsibility you might have felt you'd had. And it stems from, in my opinion, it stems from just a misunderstanding of what this is about, you know.
Yeah.
And the funny part is, once you start understanding what this is about, which is cheap, pliable labor and easy access to resources from anywhere in the world,
Yeah.
um, and the ability of the richest people on Earth to continue accumulating wealth without being overthrown. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Once you understand that, the whole thing, the whole theory behind which they're arguing about, increased resources to secure these borders, it falls apart.
Yep.
There, if you, and the funny part to me is you don't have to look far to see or hear why they're doing what they're doing and to understand it. The Defense Department has been talking for a long time about the danger, the risk to political social upheaval of mass migration caused by climate change. You know,
Yep.
like they know that. That's why if you read Todd Miller, the Empire of Borders, the externalization of bordering, the sort of
Mm-hmm.
way that the West has made this the same scenario in the Mediterranean, these
Mm-hmm.
turnbacks, this abandonment of asylum, that kind of thing. That's one aspect of it. And then just the historical antecedents upon which these rich guys are building their wealth. I mean, that's Harsha Walia and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and scholars. Like, you don't have to, the problem is it's hard. I think it messes with your worldview. And the way
Yeah.
that we understand politics is through like a consistent worldview. And if you change your worldview, then all of a sudden you got to change a lot of your political commitments. It's not the information is not out there, like
Right.
it's here. Everybody's done the work. We've done the reading. Everybody's done the homework. People have documented it. Journalists have documented it. And now like it takes organizing and resilience. And frankly, from where I sit, this is going to be it's gone from being in my uh, foolish youth as a legal advocate, thinking this would be a years long project, and I'd have the second half of my life to do fun things like be a musician, which is how I started, is going to music school. So I was thinking, yeah, we'll do this in 10 years. We'll shut down private prisons in 10 years. Here's how we'll do it. Here's my theory. To being, okay, this is a decades long project,
Yeah,
that
generations.
I to being this is not going to be something that resolves in my lifetime, and all I can do is document it,
Yeah,
which
that's where I am as
sucks.
well.
Which
It
sucks
sucks, but
because here
it's
we
also
are.
kind of
Like,
like helps me at the same time to realize like I'm just a small piece in this. And I hope my work lives beyond me, but we never know if it will or not. But yeah.
yeah, it gets better, I think, when you conceptualize is, we're doing this for everybody. We care about people.
Yeah.
And we care about like the not to get too lofty, but like I think human beings can be better to one another. I know that they don't. I think human beings can treat each other better. I think societies can evolve. I think if any time is ripe for us to do it, it's now.
Yeah.
Um, so it takes work.
It's a
It takes
good time
commitment.
to be in the fight, that's for sure.
Yeah. So
Never know what's going to happen. We never thought we
anybody
would
who's
be
on the
here.
fence, we
So,
need you. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, like join a mutual aid group, get involved in your local detention writing campaign, donate to a bond fund, think about talking to your legislators about, policies that would actually make communities safer and healthier. And, for heaven's sakes, like don't just doom scroll.
I think we should leave it with that. Thank you for
Sounds good,
joining
Jen.
me.